On an ordinary day in an upscale part of town, a man named Marcus stepped into a store. He wasn't there to cause trouble. No, Marcus was a successful businessman, dressed sharply, a man of quiet dignity. He'd come to find a gift, a simple act, a gesture of thoughtfulness for someone he cared about. But as he crossed the store's polished floor, something happened that he didn't see coming. He became invisible. Not in a way you might imagine. No, he was there, moving past displays, nodding politely to staff, ready to ask for assistance like any other customer. But the eyes of the staff never met his. Instead, they flickered away, dismissive, cold. And then he met her. She stood behind the counter, eyes narrowing slightly as Marcus approached. Her name was Susan, a clerk with years behind the counter and a forced smile she reserved for those she deemed worthy of her attention. But today, as Marcus walked up, that smile disappeared altogether. She didn't nod. She didn't welcome him. She didn't even acknowledge his presence as she tended to the next person in line, a customer who'd just walked in. To Marcus, this wasn't a small oversight. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice, a decision that would change everything. Marcus tried again, clearing his throat, hoping to catch her eye. But her eyes flickered past him, cold, indifferent. And as he opened his mouth to speak, her expression hardened, as if his voice itself was unwelcome in the space around her. She looked him over, once, twice, in a way that left no doubt of her judgment. It was subtle, restrained, but unmistakably, she saw Marcus as someone who did not belong. What happened next might seem simple, even unremarkable to those who weren't there. But what unfolded in that store on that day would spark a reckoning, exposing something hidden, something that would leave a lasting mark, one that neither Marcus nor Susan could have anticipated. Because Marcus had come to that store with a purpose, one that would go far beyond buying a simple gift. Marcus wasn't an ordinary man. A self-made businessman, he'd risen above obstacles many could only imagine. Humble beginnings, years of dedication, and a reputation for kindness. To those who knew him, he was the kind of man who lifted others up, a man who believed in treating people with respect. But Susan didn't see any of that. To her, Marcus was merely an intruder, someone who didn't fit the picture she had of a worthy customer. He didn't have to say a word, didn't have to make a single misstep. Her mind was already made up. Susan had spent years behind that counter, judging the worth of each person who walked through those doors. Over time, she developed a habit of showing warmth to some and cold, calculated indifference to others. And on more than one occasion, that indifference had taken on a cruel edge when faced with a person of color. Subtle comments here, a condescending look there, but nothing that ever caught the attention of management or her colleagues. Marcus approached the counter again, this time with a soft, polite question, asking for help with a specific item he'd been considering. He kept his tone even, respectful, the same way he might speak to a friend. But Susan's response was as icy as her expression. She didn't meet his eyes, her voice dripping with disdain as she replied, "People like you don't belong here." The words hung in the air, stinging, each syllable heavy with intent. In that moment, Marcus felt it a deep, undeniable message meant to push him away, to make him feel small. But Marcus was no stranger to adversity. He stood his ground, looked her in the eye, and asked her again, calm, unyielding. The other customers watched, silent, as if frozen in the sudden chill that had descended. They saw Marcus's restraint, his dignity. But Susan only saw an opportunity to assert her authority. She turned to the next customer, dismissing Marcus completely, making her intentions clear. To her, he wasn't even worth the courtesy of a simple response. But what Susan didn't realize, what she could never have anticipated, was that her actions that day were only the beginning. She had started something far bigger than she ever intended, a series of events that would uncover a truth much larger than both of them. And so, what began as a simple act of shopping, a kind gesture for a loved one, turned into something neither Marcus nor Susan would ever forget. The reckoning was about to begin. Marcus, ever composed, took a deep breath, deciding to address Susan directly. Calmly, he asked her a simple question, his tone soft yet firm. "Could you tell me why you're refusing to help me?" In that moment, all he wanted was an answer. Perhaps an acknowledgement, something to clarify the hostility she was throwing his way. But Susan's response was anything but reasonable. Her voice dripped with condescension as she looked him up and down, each word designed to wound. "You really think you can afford anything here?" she sneered, barely concealing her disdain. Marcus was taken aback, the weight of her words settling in his chest. This was no longer just neglect. It was a brazen insult, one meant to belittle and demean. Marcus's calm resolve began to crack, but he held steady. Around him, customers began to shift uncomfortably, glancing at each other as they registered what was happening. Some looked away, choosing to avoid the confrontation unfolding before them, while others whispered, shocked by Susan's open hostility. The air grew thick, and Marcus knew he could no longer stay silent. He asked Susan again, his voice firmer now, pressing her to explain herself. But this only seemed to fuel her hostility. Just as the exchange escalated, a bystander, Rachel, could no longer stand idly by. She moved closer, standing beside Marcus as an ally, her phone discreetly raised to capture the moment. Her voice cut through the rising noise, steady and clear. "Why are you treating him this way?" she asked, challenging Susan's attitude with quiet courage. But Susan turned on her just as quickly, her face twisting with frustration. "You're both disturbing the peace," she hissed, accusing Marcus and Rachel of creating a scene. Susan's words were cold, dismissive. To her, this wasn't a situation to resolve but a disruption to remove. In a final act of control, she picked up the store's phone, calling security and painting Marcus and Rachel as instigators. The mood in the store turned as Susan's accusations hung in the air, casting Marcus and Rachel as troublemakers in the eyes of those who didn't know the full story. Some customers quietly continued their shopping, hesitant to get involved. Others watched closely, torn between discomfort and curiosity, uncertain of what might happen next. The unease spread, and the line was drawn. The tension was palpable, and Marcus, still composed but seething with frustration, looked around, finding himself at the center of a moment no one could look away from. The security guards arrived swiftly, their faces stern as Susan relayed her version of the story. Her voice was filled with indignation as she described Marcus and Rachel as disruptive, painting herself as the victim of an unprovoked confrontation. To them it seemed clear-cut, and they moved toward Marcus, prepared to escort him out. But then, Rachel spoke up, her voice firm. "I recorded everything," she said, holding up her phone, her gaze unwavering as she met the guard's eyes. "You should take a look before you make a decision." The guards exchanged a glance, caught between Susan's authority and Rachel's evidence. Reluctantly, they agreed to review the footage, halting what seemed like an inevitable act of injustice. In that brief pause, the store fell silent, the tension simmering as everyone waited for what the footage might reveal. Susan stood by, her expression faltering as the guards pressed play, watching the events unfold on Rachel's phone. Each second added weight to the silence, a collective breath held as the truth began to surface. The disturbance had drawn the attention of the store manager, Mr. Thompson, a man known for his strictness and his trust in his staff. He arrived on the scene, his face twisted with irritation as he surveyed the scene. Susan wasted no time, explaining her side of the story with an air of righteousness, casting herself as the professional clerk, merely doing her job. At first, Mr. Thompson's demeanor suggested that he'd already made up his mind. To him, it appeared Marcus and Rachel were responsible for the commotion, and he seemed prepared to side with Susan's account. But Marcus held his ground, meeting Mr. Thompson's gaze with a quiet resolve, a determination to be heard. In that moment, Marcus spoke, his tone calm yet filled with purpose. He explained his side of the story, detailing his initial request, Susan's refusal to serve him, and the racially charged remarks she'd made. He stood tall, showing restraint in the face of deep injustice. And as Mr. Thompson listened, his irritation began to fade, replaced by a glimmer of doubt. Mr. Thompson's initial certainty wavered, and a flicker of unease crossed his face as he considered the possibility that Susan's story might not align with the truth. The room fell into a tense silence, the question hanging heavy in the air. Would he stand by his employee's words, or would he seek the truth that lay hidden within the recorded footage? Hours after the incident, Rachel took to social media, sharing the video with a simple caption. "This needs to be seen." Her video captured everything: the hostility in Susan's voice, the disdain in her gaze, and Marcus's calm, dignified response to an unthinkable insult. It didn't take long before the video gained traction. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands as people shared it, each viewer struck by the stark injustice unfolding on their screens. From every corner, people reacted with disbelief and anger. Some responded with personal stories of their own experiences, while others tagged the store and its corporate executives, demanding accountability. Comments flooded in, a collective outrage, with viewers calling for change. "This can't go unchecked," one post read. "People need to see what's happening right in front of us," said another. The video was no longer just evidence. It had become a rallying cry. The pressure mounted with each passing hour, and the store found itself at the center of a social media firestorm, with its reputation on the line and no easy way out. As the outrage grew, one thing became clear: this was far from over. With the video spreading like wildfire, the corporate headquarters had no choice but to address the growing crisis. The executives, alarmed by the potential fallout, reached out to Marcus, seeking a way to control the damage. A formal invitation arrived in his inbox, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident and find a resolution. But Marcus, no stranger to empty promises, was prepared. He knew this wasn't just a conversation, it was a fight for accountability. Determined to make sure this wasn't brushed under the rug, Marcus brought his lawyer to the meeting. Together they walked into the room, a silent statement that he wasn't there for appeasement or platitudes. This was about real change, and he was prepared to hold them to it. The executives seemed nervous, their voices careful as they spoke, aware that their words were being measured. They offered apologies, reassurances, but Marcus didn't let up. He pressed them, his lawyer by his side, challenging every vague promise, every deflection. Marcus's presence was a reminder that this wasn't a PR exercise, it was a reckoning. Following the meeting, corporate announced an internal investigation into Susan's conduct, an effort to prove they were taking the incident seriously. Behind the scenes, however, Marcus knew the battle wasn't over. A true investigation, he was told, could uncover more than what was seen in that single video. It could reveal a pattern, a history of complaints that had been ignored, stories of mistreatment that had been swept aside in favor of convenience. As corporate dug deeper, unsettling details began to emerge. Complaints filed by customers of color, reports of subtle but undeniable discrimination, all pointing back to Susan. These reports had been quietly dismissed, deemed unsubstantiated, a pattern hidden behind closed doors. But now, with the world watching, they had no choice but to confront the truth. The investigation moved forward, piece by piece, painting a picture of long-standing injustice that could no longer be ignored. And for the first time, Marcus felt a sense of validation, a feeling shared by those who had come forward with similar experiences. This wasn't just about his moment with Susan, it was a chance for others to find justice as well. But as the investigation neared its conclusion, one question remained: would corporate hold true to their word and deliver real consequences? Or would this be another case of justice delayed, justice denied? As the investigation concluded, corporate was left with no choice but to take decisive action. Susan's employment was terminated effective immediately, her conduct deemed incompatible with the store's values, a stark reminder that actions, especially those steeped in prejudice, carry consequences. A public statement followed, the store issuing a formal apology to Marcus, acknowledging the injustice he endured and expressing a commitment to prevent such incidents in the future. The video, still circulating widely, sparked a renewed wave of public reaction. Online, people shared their thoughts, some expressing relief, others venting frustration that it had taken so long for Susan's behavior to be addressed. As news spread, former employees began to come forward, sharing their own encounters and stories of racial discrimination under her management. What emerged was a troubling pattern, a long-overlooked issue that had flourished in the shadows. With each new account, it became clear that Susan's actions weren't isolated, they were symptoms of a larger problem. The exposure sparked a public outcry, demanding accountability not just from Susan, but from the management that had allowed this to persist. Corporate now faced a choice: make real changes or risk losing the trust of their customers. Faced with mounting pressure and a tarnished reputation, the store took steps to address the underlying issues that had surfaced. A policy overhaul was announced. All employees, from clerks to executives, would undergo mandatory anti-racism and sensitivity training. This wasn't just a PR move. It was a commitment to reshape the store's culture, to build an environment of respect and inclusivity. As part of this reform, Marcus was invited to share his story with the employees, a first-hand account of the pain and resilience that followed his encounter with Susan. Standing before a room filled with store staff and executives, Marcus spoke openly, his voice steady as he recounted the hurt, the humiliation, but also the hope that things could improve. His words struck a chord, stirring emotions among those in the room. And for the first time, the staff saw the impact of prejudice not as a distant issue, but as a personal one. In that moment, the store's culture began to shift, each person touched by the raw honesty in Marcus's words. The training wasn't just about policies and procedures. It was a step toward empathy, a new understanding of the cost of complacency, and Marcus left that room knowing he had planted the seeds of genuine change. Reflecting on the journey, Marcus couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and pride. What had started as a painful moment of discrimination had transformed into a movement toward accountability and change. By standing up, by refusing to be silent, he had inspired a wave of support, not only from those close to him, but from strangers, allies, and communities who resonated with his story. A few customers who had witnessed that fateful interaction reached out, offering words of encouragement, sharing their gratitude for his bravery, and expressing a renewed sense of community solidarity. They, too, wanted to see a world where dignity and respect were given freely, without question. Marcus felt the power of this connection, the power of one voice, amplified by allies, capable of challenging deeply ingrained systems of bias. Marcus's story became a testament to the difference one person can make, a reminder that each of us holds the power to stand up, to speak out, and to hold others accountable. His journey inspired change, not just for himself but for countless others who might face similar injustices. And now, the question turns to you, the viewer. How will you use your voice? How will you stand up in the face of prejudice? And what change can you inspire in your own community? Marcus's story shows us that one voice, armed with truth, can ripple out and create real change. Standing up against injustice isn't easy, but every act of courage, every choice to speak out, brings us one step closer to a world where respect and dignity are rights, not privileges. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to the silent struggles many face, then let it be more than just a moment, make it a message. Share this video, spread awareness, and inspire others to confront racial bias wherever it hides. Together, we can be the voices that drive change, one story at a time.